Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Biotech Forum. I am the moderator of this session. I am Lingya Wang. Let me briefly introduce myself. Now I'm working in Toys Bioscience, which is a synthetic biology company that print DNA into various DNA products. And in the biopharma team, we use these DNA libraries to make better therapeutic antibody drugs. So we will have better chance to get better drug. That is the principle. So today in the forum, we are happy to invite these great speakers, including the team, our keynote speaker, Michael and Hannah. So I'll let them introduce themselves, like including your background, what's your current role, and what's your mission. We can start from Hannah.
Yeah, happy to. Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Shan. Right now, I'm the VP of Strategy for Octan. So Octan is also a tech bio company backed by A16Z, among others. We focus on trying to understand what are the way we can use our platform to developing drugs to target things that requires multi-targeting or targeting multiple signaling pathway or several genetic variants. And my role in there is to focus on both the corporate strategy as well as the R&D strategy, thinking about just like what diseases we should be targeting, and then given the diseases which we are targeting, how do we think about our financing and so on. Before that, I was at BridgeBio Pharma. It's a company focused on genetic diseases and precision oncology. I focus on asset acquisition. So essentially, the term asset acquisition meaning that we acquire new programs into the company. And my team, overall, we together brought in about 16 different programs into the company when I led the team, and ranging from early discovery stage programs all the way to clinical stage trial, as well as from small molecule, gene therapy, antisense oligos, and across multiple therapeutic areas. And before then, I was at Benchling, a technology software company. And then before that, I was at Harvard doing a PhD in molecular biology and systems neuroscience, and grew up in Taiwan.
Okay, next will be Michael.
大家好，假爸爸。I'm Michael Liu. I'm the dean of the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley, and let me just say it's such a great honor to share this panel with Hannah, with Tim, with Leah. Just a couple things about myself. So first, even though I'm dean at Berkeley Public Health right now, I'm 100% MIT, made in Taiwan, Taiwan Xin, Taiwan Lang, and I'm proud to be the first Taiwanese American Dean of Public Health in this country. And the second thing is, I bet that I have spent more time in the University of California system than any of you here in the audience. I've actually spent about 26 years of my life on 4 different campuses. So I started undergrad at Stanford, and then I saw the light across the bay, right? Via Lux, let there be light. And so I got my master's at Berkeley, my MD at UCSF, did my residency in OBGYN at UC Irvine, and then joined the faculty at UCLA, where I was a professor of OBGYN public health for about 15 years before I went to Washington, D.C. and led maternal and child health for the country for about 6 years, 5 years in the Obama administration and 1 year in the Trump administration, and I can tell you all sorts of crazy stories. Now, in terms of mission, listen, we got big problems in the world today, right? And when you think of some of the biggest problems facing the world today, when you think of some of the greatest existential threats to humanity in the 21st century, from climate change to pandemic outbreaks, from chronic diseases to social inequality, these are all problems that require public health to be front and center in driving solutions. And that's why I think I got the greatest job in the world, right? Because for most people, they just get to sit on the sideline and watch the house burn down. But I get to go to work every day and work with some of the most brilliant people, not only at my school, but across the Berkeley campus, across Silicon Valley, and across the entire Pacific Rim to try to innovate solutions to some of the biggest problems, biggest challenges of facing humanity in the 21st century. And that's a pretty awesome mission, and that's why I love my job.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And for Tim, although RC already introduced you, any fun fact you want to talk about yourself?
Fun fact, well, that's a little bit surprised, right? I don't think I can top sort of the mission statement we just heard, so I think that was really exciting. Maybe the only fun fact I'd mention is, I no longer work in the lab anymore, which is good. When I was a PhD student, I actually set the lab on fire twice. So I always joke with my PhD advisor. I was very grateful he let me graduate. I think it was a way for him to get me out of the lab. So.
All right. So the main topic of this forum today is actually the challenge during pandemic and post-pandemic new trends. So I wanted to ask the speakers about how does pandemic affect your field? What is the major challenge and changes before and after pandemic? So we can start with Tim, that we observed some huge investment in biotech industry during pandemic, but it seems like cooling down. Is that true? And what is the gain and loss?
Yeah, well, so maybe before I answer that, I think one thing I sort of alluded to this earlier. I think one of the things the pandemic actually taught us is we can actually move drugs really fast if we wanted to. but to do that, we need to actually invest in fundamental science from a very early date. So I was a faculty member at MIT for quite a long time, and one of the programs we were involved in was a DARPA program, US government funded. This was like 12 years ago. And the program manager had this crazy idea, which is how could we detect pandemics before they happen or right when they happen and turn them into vaccines or drugs super fast? And at the time, we submitted, we were part of that grant program, but Moderna was part of that program, and there were several other companies. And the crazy idea at the time was stop making vaccines inside of eggs, which is how we do make flu vaccines in some cases. But let's actually program vaccines using DNA and RNA, right? This is a bunch of like crazy academics or small companies at the time getting funding from the US government and doing really difficult work to try to prove that this capability was possible. And I think very few people even expected something like COVID would happen, right? So it was all on a bet. Frankly, I give a lot of credit to this one program manager and also DARPA for being able to fund crazy ideas at the time. And that stuff's hung around for like 10 years until the pandemic happened. And it was the right call, right? Because DNA synthesis, RNA, expression, all these technologies had to be developed to a point where we could actually, respond to the pandemic that quickly, right? And I think the world's very fortunate that those investments were made. So I think hopefully the bigger picture thing that teaches us is there's a role to be played here, not just on the financial side, because investors tend to be more short-minded, but there are important roles for, the public, for the government to fund fundamental research, not because necessarily we know what we're going to do with that research, but likely if we go in the right direction, it'll be useful at some point, and we just can't predict when that's going to happen. So I think that's the big picture thing from the pandemic that taught me at least. In terms of the biotech space, look, I think the pandemic probably caused craziness in the financial markets that everyone is seeing right now. There was craziness in the biotech space. There was probably craziness in tech investments. Every single company out there that was pitching a crazy story. And so a lot of money came into the field. I think biotech has always been a long-term game. And I think for folks who want to work in this space, that the field has a high failure rate. Not everything is successful. And so you have to sort of have the guts to be able to go in and believe that if you do something and you're lucky and you might be able to take a drug, but most likely you're not going to be able to do that on your first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tries. Maybe if you keep trying, you'll get there. And so I think biotech is a field of passion that you got to believe that at some point you're going to do something that's useful, and we can't predict what's going to work well or not, and we just have to power through that.
How about the challenge and the investment money? How do you think about that?
Look, I think money comes in and out of the field. I think the fundamental belief that we have is like human health is always going to be an important part of the marketplace. Pharma companies are actually sitting on a ton of cash right now. So even though there's been a pullback in perhaps late-stage venture investments or certainly in the public markets, there's still a lot of cash sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens. Biotech has been through booms and busts before, and it's still continued. I think as long as we and I tell people within the company as well, as long as we're focused on the right problems, we'll weather through this. And as long as we're doing the right things ultimately for patients, somebody's going to be willing to take a shot, right? And so that's really all we can ask for, is that we get the opportunity to take a shot. If we take a shot, we're going to be successful, personally speaking, but also, career-wise, financially, et cetera. And if it's not successful, then, you probably shouldn't be making money anyways on that endeavor. So that's the way we view the world.
Okay. So for Michael, speaking of the challenge during pandemic, how does the public health affect like biotech or pharma or other fields? And how do you say the impact on disparity and equity?
Wow. All right, well, there's some people in my field that would say if we do our work in public health really well, and that we can keep people healthy until they're 120 years old, they wake up in the morning, they go play tennis, have sex in the afternoon, and drop dead from old age, then we can run big pharma out of business. But I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I think in the coming decade, there's going to be increasingly important role that public health can play in terms of really advancing biotech, pharma, R&D. So for example, if most of you would probably like to see the ability to do clinical trials with fewer patients and half the time, right? And so this is kind of where public health could potentially help optimize clinical endpoints, optimize patient selection and site selection. I think some of you would probably like to be able to target your therapy more precisely to the right patient at the right dose at the right time. And again, this is where insights from public health, leveraging advances in epidemiology and biostatistics could potentially help improve your predictive analytics, causal inference, and precision health. And then finally, Tim was saying, how can we get medicine, how can we get potentially life-saving therapies faster into the market? And again, this is where public health can come in, working with regulators, really thinking about how do we improve the regulatory process so that we can really accelerate health innovations for social good. So I know most people, when you think about public health, you think about hand washing and sanitation, but in 21st century, there's definitely a lot more that we could be doing to partner with biotech to find cures, solutions to improve human health and save lives.
Thank you. And for Hannah, during this pandemic, can you talk about your strategy, your goals, your priority when you're making decision for asset acquisition or your current VP role? And does the strategy change before and after pandemic?
Yeah, happy to. I would say the biggest difference is that before pandemic, or actually even during pandemic, there was a huge wave of money coming to the biotech world. And then because of that, you saw a lot of crazy companies that got established during that time. There were so many things that didn't make any sense. And for anything that makes some sense, usually their evaluation is so high to the extent that nobody want to buy it. And including for us as well, just like we were not willing to do the investment for something that only shows proof of concept in vitro, and then all of a sudden they're like, we want $20 million upfront. And we're just like, sorry, this is not the type of money that we'll be willing to pay. So because of that, at that time, our transition actually starts more focusing on thinking internally, just like, are there things that we can build ourselves? Because to some extent, it could be cheaper, it could be much faster, and then also then we can control the process a lot more. And whereas like after the pandemic, I think now people all of a sudden is like coming back a little bit and then be like, wait, a lot of the investment that we have done during that period of time were pretty crazy. So all of a sudden right now, just like people in the public market, or like, I think basically everything after Series C and so, people are a lot more conservative and then want to see a lot more data before they jump in. But still, like companies who are doing great sciences continue to get funded, and I think Tim's company is a great example of that. So then the question is always the same, just like how do we generate good data, asking the right question, and then continue following the science. I think what I learned, the biggest lesson during the pandemic is just like money will come and go, and the craziness in the field will come and go, but then just like the companies that continue will be staying will be the company that follow the science.
And do you think the focus gained more or lost more globally?
I think kind of both to some extent. I think in the sense that I think when people are worried about the funding situation, a lot of time they will kind of like get a little bit more kind of closer and then look at like, okay, so like within my immediate field, within my immediate network, who are the people I can trust? So to some extent, in terms of the funding situation, I think people's appetite gets kind of like closer and then a little bit narrower. But then on the other hand, when we're thinking about, for example, clinical trial, given that right now a lot of things are so competitive, so all of a sudden people look more globally and they're asking what are some of the ways that we can, for example, setting up like 200 clinical trial sites like across the globe, like using different government systems in order to standardize the processes. And I think this kind of like contrast and then basically this kind of like both looking broadly and then looking more narrowly will continue to happen. I think that would just be the tension that we'll continue to be dealing with. I think similar to the point that, for example, just like, should we go faster? A lot of time when people try to go faster, they might be like tend to have some shortcuts that they want to make, but then making shortcuts can potentially kind of eventually make the trial not being successful. But then vice versa, if we're just like trying to like do like 10,000 different things, making sure our therapeutic hypothesis is correct, then we'll never bring anything to the clinic. And the question always is like, how much data do you need in order to be able to move forward? And how much risk are you willing to take? And then what are your strategies to come back a little bit and then asking what are your plan B and plan C?
That's a good point. And next will be an individual question for Michael. So there are more new pathogens, like emerging pathogens appearing. Like COVID, we already experienced like Alpha, Beta, Delta, Omicron until now. And not only for COVID, there's like monkeypox. So can you share your insight about the latest public health strategy in the US or maybe globally?
Yeah. First of all, let me just say something about emerging infection, just put it in the global context. So there are right now about almost 1 million viruses lurking in the wild worldwide that has the potential to jump from an animal host to a human host, what we call spillover. And there are all of these almost kind of a perfect storm of forces that are bringing these animal hosts a lot closer to human hosts, right? So climate change, deforestation, urbanization, globalization. And so because of all of that, unfortunately, I don't think COVID is going to be the last or even the deadliest pandemic this decade, right? So what can we do about it? Well, in public health, we talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. So primary prevention is about preventing pandemics from happening in the first place. So that has to start from preventing spillovers. And so that certainly we can require policy change, right? Decarbonization, reforestation, and stopping the relentless destruction of natural habitats and harvesting of wildlife. You also know that the US and China are responsible for about 60% of the illegal wildlife trades, and that's got to stop. Secondary prevention is about early detection and response to an outbreak before it spreads into a pandemic. And that's the global early warning system that we've been talking about for about 20 years now. So we have an early warning system for tsunami. We have an early warning system for earthquakes. Why can we not build an early warning system for future pandemics? Well, we certainly tried in the last 20 years, right? But what that would require is for us to train up lab technicians and build all of these laboratories all over the world, especially in places where spillover, hotspots where spillovers are likely to occur, and that's just been really, really hard. But this is where the biotech industry can really help, right? Imagine if we could put PCR in a box, or CRISPR in a box, or a multiplex that help us detect COVID, flu, and other emerging pathogens in the box. And now we can take this box to the wet market. We can take this box to do wastewater surveillance. And that these boxes are actually linked to the cloud. We could actually build this whole network of an early global warning system that would help prevent future pandemics. And then lastly, the tertiary prevention, which is kind of basically preventing harms, toll, suffering, pain, deaths once the pandemic has occurred. And that just kind of means that we got to make sure that we have enough hospitals and enough health system capacity, that we really could think about our supply chain, our manufacturing, that we got to do something about fighting the misinformation and disinformation that's causing a lot of unnecessary harm right now. And I think most importantly, we just got to build a strong, robust public health system, both in this country and around the world, to make sure that we can do a better job in primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention before the next pandemic strikes.
Thank you. And the next question is for Hannah. So we checked your bio and find that you always prefer to join the early stage company. What's the major challenge and why you prefer to join it? What's the excitement?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I get bored easily. I think that's probably one of the side effects after doing grad school. Just like it's hard to pay attention to something for 5-6 years. So the benefit of joining a much earlier company is that a lot of time you just have to be able to wear a lot of different hats. And I like to be a generalist, and that's the way that I can see myself to function better. And I think that's why I really just I like to join early stage companies. And then the second thing is also that then you play a more important role in terms of shaping the company. Then you start seeing just how the thing that you set up a few years ago and then nowadays are still using by the company. And I think a good example can be for example, Benchling. So I joined Benchling about 6 years ago when they were only 17 employees. And they were quite a few of the taglines that we designed that day, literally just happy hour. And then we're just this is a great tagline, and basically decided what it was. And 6 years later, right now the company has more than 1,000 people, and then the tagline is still on the website. So it's kind of fun to see this kind of magic happens, and then it doesn't kind of get old over time. So I think that's probably the main thing that that makes me feel earlier companies are better.
And also compare the previous working experience and current one. Can you tell us the advantage of the platform company versus the single asset company?
Oh, that's a question I think about every day. I think the biggest thing about the platform company is actually that it gives you a constraint when you are thinking about what are the right problem to solve, and can provide you the unique advantage in terms of what can you actually do differently. Because to some extent, just all the low-hanging fruits in the biotech field, I would argue that they are long gone. Just if you have a clear target and then you know the disease, and then if this thing is easy to drug, somebody else would have done it 20 years ago. So nowadays we're only left with really challenging diseases in oncology, those things that creates just so many different variants of resistance mechanisms, or maybe cardiovascular diseases that require super long trials, or neurodegenerative diseases that we just have no idea what is going on. So for a platform company, the benefit is then you can quickly narrow down your focus area, really asking just given all the things that we can be doing, what are we most uniquely positioned to do, and focusing on those. And whereas for a single asset company, I think the benefit again is that once you narrow down your question, then you can be okay, so this is this one shot that we want to take. So I think everybody has this focusing anxiety of if my bet is wrong, then just the whole company will be gone, so it's better to have it right. So that's the good thing about it. But of course then the bad thing is that from kind of asset acquisition perspective, then you essentially have this whole ocean that you can choose from. And then a lot of times then the question will be given this target, why are we going to be better at XYZ companies when they either have the platform to work on it, or compared to the big pharma when they have 10,000 scientists they can throw on the project. So that can be something challenging. And I think there are pros and cons to it. Again, I think the only thing to say is following the science and then really, really be focused once you're committed to something.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question will be for Tim. I think many people already ask you, as a multi-company co-founder, what is how do you prioritize your time and your strategy? Which company you want to start and what project you want to terminate? And when you have not enough time, how do you find helpers?
Well, I think this field is very people dependent. I think it's a complex. Drug development is hard, super hard, right? And it's prone to failure. You got to find a unique people who are willing to number one, do that, face failure, occasional success. Two is people that have, that expertise that really comes with accumulated knowledge over time. It's not something that you learn in school and you automatically know how to do it. And so the companies I've been involved in have primarily been, number one, born out of a belief that we have some unique technology so that we can be differentiated, but two, that we have the right team available to really execute on these. And so for the vast majority of the companies I've been fortunate to be involved in, we've always been able to find great co-founders, management teams, investors that come together and believe that this is the problem we want to go after together. And so it's really a team-based sort of thing. I mean, some people might ask, why did I, move here from Boston to start Senti? This is, first time I've taken that CEO role. And it came down to the same thing. I think, in other companies where we were doing development, we found a great management team to be able to execute. They understood the science. They had relevant expertise. It felt like I couldn't really necessarily add anything to that team, right? But for something like Senti, it's something I've been working on for 20 years. I know when this stuff works, when this stuff doesn't. We went out to look for is there a CEO or CSO that perhaps would bring in that expertise, and I would say that it was hard to find that. So who else is going to do this except for myself? And I decided to jump in. So it's some of that decision making, I think, that just comes about when you think about the practicalities of starting a new company and sort of need to be able to bring the relevant expertise on board. In terms of time allocation, I don't think there's an on-off switch, at least for me. It's just, just keep going and deal with problems whenever they sort of occur. So it's not it's, you only get 1 hour, you only get 5 hours is sort of approach that I take.
Okay, so this is a question for all the speakers. So from your field, what do you think the people after pandemic in your field need to have? That new mindset or new criteria, new skill set? Can you share about that? Maybe you can start from Hannah.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of the same. Again, just following the science. I really think that's the biggest thing that people should do in the field. As Tim said, the drug development process is so long, and there are so many ways that things can fail, and it better not to fail on science. The other thing I can think of is potentially about communication. I think one thing that really shows up during the pandemic is apparently we can actually work remotely for most of the time, and then actually can still run a company, and then we can still get drug approved. But the thing that people have to get better at is then being able to identify an effective channel for communication. And it's not only just communication in terms of getting your ideas across. Nowadays, we also start seeing more interdisciplinary approaches, including how to combine technology and the biotech together, such that we can invent new ways and to think about something or identify a unique perspective. And in order to do that, just people from the biology background should be able to understand and appreciate where the technologies are, being able to ask the right questions, and then having enough understanding to be able to understand when somebody gives you a good answer, how is a good answer differentiated itself compared to a mediocre answer or a non-answer, and vice versa. Just for people in the technology field, let's say if you want to go into biology, also trying to think about what are the fundamental differences. There are some engineering principles potentially can be applied, but on the other hand, biology is also a lot more complicated and a lot less predictable given so little that we know. So how do we think about the underlying thing in these things such that everybody can communicate together, and then using the right concept and then to push things forward? I think that's I think something that we can continue thinking about.
How about Tim? Not everyone can be entrepreneur. Any suggestion?
Well, I think I agree with Hannah that one of the nice things about the pandemic happening in retrospect is that it actually opened up, I think, broader opportunities for creating teams that you don't necessarily have to be solely geographically focused. I think sort of people interaction obviously is important, but that doesn't have to be necessarily the only primary criteria you use when you build a team. And so I think biotech was always starting to move to a more virtualized model in many cases, but I think this has helped push that in the future. And I think the other aspect, I hope maybe talking to some people in the crowd here, is I think the pandemic has made everyone realize how important human health is in our daily lives. You take it for granted. And so even if you didn't grow up in the field of bio or whatever, I grew up as an ECS guy initially. I think there's a lot to contribute into this space now. Even if you're coming from a computer science perspective, a hardware perspective, et cetera, there are you can make better devices. We need people who know how to do machine learning in bio. We need people to, think about new approaches, even downstream of the discovery phase, how to execute clinical trials better, more efficiently, how to design clinical studies in that sense. Like that sort of interdisciplinary expertise is going to be even more in demand in the future. And so as a job career, I think that's number one, super exciting. But two is actually we do need people who have those sort of talents coming into the drug development space.
How about Michael?
Yeah, I think for the kind of public health problems that we're going to have to solve in the future, COVID kind of basically shown us that simply having technical skills is not enough, right? You really need what I call change-making skills: leadership, management, communication, collaboration, community organizing, strategic thinking, policy, advocacy, the ability to bring about change that you want to see in the world, and whether that's organizational change, systems change, community, societal, or global change. And that's why, as a dean of public health, one of my top goals is to make sure that by the time that my students graduate, that they're graduating with not only a world-class education in the core public health sciences, right? Environmental health science, epidemiology, biostatistics, but that they're actually graduating with the knowledge, the tools, and skills to really help change the world.
Okay, thank you. The next question is that we are here because we are connected with Taiwan in different ways. I'm also MIT, made in Taiwan. So, so can you share your insight about the difference between Taiwan or Asia compared with US in terms of research, business, funding, education, talent, in all different aspects? We can start from Tim.
That's a good question.
The big question.
I would say, as a faculty member at MIT, obviously talent comes from a lot of places, right? So I think, talent is certainly global. I think everyone here is in the U.S. right now. I think one of the nice things, pre-pandemic and hopefully continues post-pandemic is that, the U.S. continues to be a place where, the best and brightest come together, in big picture-wise. I think some of the things that have emerged in my mind over time is that there are pretty big differences certainly, let's say Taiwan, but also other geographies in terms of how clinical studies are run, at least in our space. So I'll just give you one example, maybe two examples. In the U.S., you want to make a drug happen. You go to the FDA, you submit an IND. It's a pretty well-defined pathway. It's well-trodden, well understood. The U.S. FDA has a lot of expertise in novel drugs, and so they tend to be working quite closely together with biotech companies to try to figure those things out. Not all countries are like that. Some countries have very conservative FDAs and very slow at reviewing new technologies, and you can run into a brick wall if you try to introduce something too crazy into those frameworks. Other countries are on the other extreme, which is even more open. So I'll take China as an example. In our space, we do cell therapy work. Probably the most cell therapy trials are being run actually in China, not in the US, and that's because there's this other pathway. You don't have to go to the Chinese FDA. You could actually, there's a separate pathway where you can work with an investigator at a hospital, convince them that they should do a relatively small patient trial, but you could actually move much faster into the clinic. And so one might argue, on one hand, the conservative person might argue that's a bad thing because maybe the quality's not as good, or are you missing certain things, or you're not manufacturing things to a certain standard. On the other hand, the benefit is you can actually test this thing a lot faster. The key bottleneck in the biotech space is we don't get to humans until much later on in the process. And so if you can actually treat a patient, who's likely, unfortunately, is probably in their last stages anyways, but you can actually learn about whether this product works, it actually allows you to iterate your product a lot faster. So there's pros and cons to doing that. I think for Taiwan, perhaps, to think about where it can spend some time, as I mentioned, the development of new drugs is becoming increasingly an engineering-based process, not simply a screening process. And I think because of that, it's going to require a lot of fundamental investments in automation, machine learning approaches. And I think hopefully some of the talent that has really grown up building that sort of expertise could be applied actually into the biotech space. So I think that's one area to potentially think about.
And how about Michael? The policy difference or talent difference?
Yeah, I'll also comment on the Taiwanese talent. So I've been hosting a number of startups as part of a Taiwan Berkeley Health Innovation Accelerator program. And I'll kind of give you an example. This year, I was working with a company, a couple founders that's developing an instrument for Achilles tendon repair, soft tissue repair. And so at our first meeting, they showed me the prototype, and they were trying to show me how to use it and stuff. And as a surgeon, it just didn't feel right? That the instrument felt plasticky, it just wasn't very intuitive. And as a surgeon, you kind of want to be looking at the patient and not looking at your hand. So I just provide a few comments to them. And guess what? Usually if I do that here in the US, it would probably take months and months for somebody to re-prototype it, redesign it. But basically, they sent my comments back to their shop in Taiwan, and within 2 weeks, they came back with the new prototype, right? And it was so much better than the first prototype. And then we've gone through several iterative processes, and then I connected them with real orthopedic surgeons who also provide some comments back. And then a few months later, they went to Select USA, which is this big global competition that's put on by the US government, the Department of Commerce, and they won first place in that global competition, right? And that just kind of shows me the incredible talent, just absolutely amazing, creative, innovative, and just probably some of the hardest working innovators and entrepreneurs that I've ever met. I think what Taiwan needs, they could certainly use more help around business strategy, communication, marketing. They could get greater insights into the healthcare market, policy, regulation, financing. And I think they could also probably do a little more in terms of being more user-centric, more patient-centered design, so that when they're inventing something, don't start with the technology, right? Start with the problem that you're trying to solve. But otherwise, I think there's incredible talent in Taiwan, which I think really position Taiwan as a potential to be a global giant in the biotech and health innovation industry.
And Hannah?
I think I'm lucky to go with the last one for this question. This is really hard. I think the Taiwanese people, we are very scrappy. We're very efficient. We're super hardworking. And I also think, especially just right now for people in Taiwan, people are also very hungry of doing something different, something innovative, and then something that can really help Taiwan to be at the global stage. So I think we have a lot of the right ingredients from the talent side. So just if you think about, for example, I think right now the most mature industry for biotech, more specifically in Taiwan, would be doing clinical trials, or doing some of the reagent prepping. Just some of the quality that I've seen so far is one of the best, some of the best that I've seen across the world. And the question, I think, as Michael pointed out, is then how do we use this drive to not only do things for other people, but then also for ourselves, and then finding our own unique angle. And that requires people to really think about, because I think limitation is really the way to get to a creative solution. Taiwan is more limited in funding for sure, especially for biotech, which to some extent one could argue that, this is such a significant limitation, because for all the drug development, it just really requires tons and tons of money. But then on the other hand, I also could argue that that can really creates a space for us to think about what exactly is the unique area that Taiwan can be focusing on. Just maybe our space is not going to be let's try to find this target where you just in theory you can treat 1 million people, but then just everybody is thinking about those type of diseases and targets too. Just maybe just the thing that we'll be good at is more focusing on precision oncology, because we have people who are really, really great at engineering. We have one of the best healthcare systems and EMRs available. So how do we use this information to find things that other people won't be able to find because they don't have those type of systems in place and the talents in place. And I think that's the direction I think we can consider more. And also similarly, just like trying to look globally in terms of like what are other people good at versus bad at, such that then we can figure out for ourselves like what are the things that we can uniquely be good at, and then using our strength to fight against other people's weakness. Just like life is too hard, just like don't try to just like fight other people with like whatever they are good at, just like fight with like their weaknesses. Life is much better that way.
Yeah, and next question, actually you already touched some of this question. So what do you see Taiwan's role in the global stage in this bio field from your point of view? And what do you think we can combine the strength from Taiwan and US? Hannah, you want to go last one? Okay. So we can maybe start from Tim, because for Taiwan, the computational science, AI, that field is also strong. And you talk about like AI. So do you think you can cut in from this angle?
Yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity. Honestly, I think one of the things during COVID that I did personally was spend a lot of time in Taiwan because my kids' school is closed here, so we sent them back. And actually during that time, I actually got to know a lot of people who are working in that space over there. I think that's a huge opportunity. I mean, obviously machine learning talent here is great, amazing, right? But I think there is actually a lot of computational know-how, expertise in Taiwan that I think if you combine that together with folks who are in the drug development space who can point them in the right direction, you could actually make a very, very, perhaps much more capital efficient way of doing that sort of research. I think maybe building a little bit on what Hannah was saying earlier is, I think for better or for worse, the US is still the biggest market for drugs. And so as a result, most of the capital is here, most of the interactions with pharma is here. You have to deal with the US FDA if you want to generate the most value for your company. And so I think there is necessarily like, a Taiwanese biotech company can't just focus on the Taiwan market, and probably increasingly shouldn't focus on the China market. It's got to focus on solving problems in the US healthcare system in many cases. But as a result, like entrepreneurs or companies or people who work in the space need to like understand what the actual problems are in the US healthcare system, and that bridge is actually pretty important and not always easy to do.
Yeah, and for Michael, because there are some new disease that is not popular in Taiwan, but it's in US or on the other way. So what do you think like Taiwan's role, like in Asia or in the world?
Yeah, I think pretty much like what Tim just said. I do think that Taiwan has the potential to be an industry giant in the world. Talked about AI and data science. Taiwan has one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It's got incredible manufacturing capabilities, and like Hannah said, Taiwan has some of the most scrappy, hardest working innovators and entrepreneurs. I think what Taiwan really lacks right now is the internationalization of R&D, of capitalization, of market. And that's where I think those of us who love Taiwan here in the Bay Area, we can help, right? And I'm kind of reminded by some of my colleagues who helped start the semiconductor industry in Taiwan 34 years ago, that it was this Taiwan Silicon Valley connection that really helped spur Taiwan's dominance in the semiconductor industry over the last 30, 40 years. I'm really hoping that it's this Taiwan Silicon Valley connection that would really help promote Taiwan's success in this next industry, building that next TSMC of biotech in Taiwan for generations to come.
Are you ready?
Maybe. So the same question. Yeah. So I think from my standpoint, I think similar to what Tim and Michael have already said as well, just I do think that the thing that we can be better at is to think about how we can bring our current perspective in the Bay Area and then back to Taiwan, but then in a way that not necessarily saying that just like everything that happens in the US is amazing, because we all know that there's a lot of problems. But then just like then thinking about then how do you first globalize yourself, and then going back and then using the learnings and then create a local version that actually makes sense for what Taiwan can be focusing on, and then continue to leverage that and then continue to build a network. The thing I find to be interesting / challenging a lot of time for people, I think especially for people who have been in the States for a while, is that all of a sudden all your network is actually in the States, and then when you go back to Taiwan, you're like, oh, actually, like I don't know a ton of people, and then it actually becomes like hard for people to know where to get started, how to get the right network, and then getting climated again into a different ecosystem and society. So the thing I think we can, but then however, I think a lot of people actually decide to do that, and then just like we all know quite a few of our friends who actually decide to take the step and then going back to Taiwan and then trying to find different ways to contribute. And I think the question we can always ask ourselves is that then how do we learn both sides of the world such that when we are start thinking about strategy, thinking about like what can be our competitive advantage, we can think both globally on like what is needed in the entire world, but then also thinking about like what is like unique for Taiwan so that we can continue building on it. And I do think that the angle would either be like manufacturing because we're super efficient, very crappy, or thinking about the engineering side of things and then trying to see how we can combine together.
That's a great answer. So I think due to time, we'll have the last question. So I know the biotech people in this audience is minority. So I think today is a good chance to let our speakers to promote biotech to the audience. So the last question will be like, can we summarize the new trend or new direction after a pandemic in your field? Who want to go first?
Should I pay my due now? I think for me, the biggest one is to think about your own unique competitive advantage and then continue following the science. Because I think regardless whether your background is coming from tech or coming from biotech, just like we're all the same. Just like we believe in like how to find the right question, how to identify the right methodologies to solve the question, and then how to interpret the data such that we can take the next step. And then just like now we also need a very interdisciplinary approach in order to continue solving these problems and then bringing in innovative solutions. And I think this is like an amazing time for anybody to really jump into the biotech world, regardless whether the background is in tech or like in businesses or in biology. Because frankly, even for people like whose background in biology, just like most of us, we didn't really study drug development in the first place. So there are a lot of different ways that we can work together and then really drive into a solution. And I think one of the greatest things that I found about the drug development industry is really about people's passion to make an impact for patients. And I think that's one of the blessings I think I have, just like being able to like be in those like privileged position and then thinking about these questions day in, day out. I think it's, and then working with like some of the smartest people in the world, I think it's really, yeah, I also really love my job.
Thank you.
I'll make a really simple pitch, right? If you could actually be at the beginning of when Silicon Valley got started or when the first transistor was discovered, would you have made that jump or not? Think about that versus today. I think biotech is at a similar inflection point. You know, it is actually, I feel like there's a fundamental shift in how people are approaching the understanding of disease today. We actually understand more and more the molecular basis of disease. We can actually read, you know, not just DNA, we can read RNA, we can read proteins inside of the cells in much more powerful ways. That's like an insight into a fundamentally, you know, super important system that, you know, previously has been really hard to do. And so we're right at the beginning of that. Like the stuff we're talking about today is, I think 50 years from now, it's gonna be like light years ahead of, you know, the really simple stuff I just threw up on a slide. So do you want to be part of that? That's the main question. I think for me, you know, the answer was yes. That's why I made the jump. It probably psychologically is a lot easier not to be in biotech because biotech is composed of a lot of failures with, you know, very little successes. But I think the ability to perhaps contribute to that, I think beyond just who you are as a person, but to the general health of society is really why people who are in the biotech field are really passionate about it. So that's what I would say to the audience here.
All right, well, let me talk about a couple trends that I see post-pandemic. One is certainly greater use of telehealth. I know that pre-pandemic, only about 50% of doctors' offices are equipped for telehealth. Now it's over 90%, and I think there's just going to be greater and greater use of telehealth. I think something that Tim mentioned earlier around precision health, the right therapy for the right patient at the right dose at the right time, the right place. I think that's going to be increasingly important. Can I just say one more thing? I'm not going to plug biotech, but I'm going to plug public health.
Okay.
And I know this is a little bit of heresy in a tech conference, but as much as we like to think that we can solve all human problems, human health problems with science and technology, I think COVID has shown us that we need to do a lot more, right? That so much of health is driven not just by access to good drugs and healthcare and so forth, but it's driven by what we call social determinants: the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and the social and physical environments in which we live and work and grow and age. And that's where, if we really want to improve population health, certainly very, very important to leverage science and technology, but we got to also make sure that we roll up our sleeves and we go out there and fight for health equity, for social justice, fight for clean air and water, fight for healthcare as a right, and healthcare and health for all. I think only with that are we going to truly be able to achieve health equity for all. And honestly, that's the work of public health.
Thank you. Due to time, we cannot ask more questions, so let's thank our speakers today.